Of course, that is the situation in Kenya, where police were seen firing off a tear gas in Nairobi's central business district in attempts to disperse protests on Thursday. This as some protesters vowed to occupy the State House despite the president's climb down on the proposed tax hikes that sparked a week of demonstrations. We are joined by Dr. Emmaculate Asige Liaga. She is a postdoctoral researcher at the Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation. She's joining us via our telephone line. Dr. Asige, thank you so much for your time. Let's take where we left off. I mean, we of course know that the bill has been passed in Parliament, but was awaiting the president's signature. We saw, of course, yesterday he announced amid violent protests not to sign the bill, yet we are still witnessing these protests. I mean, is this a sign or an indication of Kenyans questioning the legitimacy of that government and, of course, Ruto's leadership?
Thank you, Nacha. I'm sorry for the connection hiccups earlier. So your question is actually twofold. Yes, Kenyans are still unsatisfied with President Ruto, not only him remaining in power right now, but also how he's been conducting himself and his power over the last couple of days when Kenyans are protesting. So it's such a complex thing that's not only about the bill. But if I just come back to the bill and just to explain something, according to our Constitution on Chapter 8, Part 4, where it explains procedures of whether the president can assent or refer the bill. So the president cannot withdraw the bill. The president can only assent the bill or refer it back to Parliament for reconsideration by Parliament, noting any reservation that the president has concerning the bill. And if the president does not bring the bill back to the Parliament in 7 days, according to clause 6, if the president does not assent the bill or refer it back to Parliament within the period, it will automatically assent on expiry of that period. So Kenyans are very aware that the rejection, or rather the withdrawal of the bill, as he said, is incorrect in the terms that he used. And they're also aware that if there's any action the president can do, is actually to refer it back to Parliament with corrections. Remember, the Kenyans are asking for a total rejection of the bill. And some of these procedures are actually unprecedented. They have not happened before. And there's a debate between lawyers and in the legal sphere in terms of how can we actually achieve that rejection. Will it go to Parliament and then amendments to be done? Will the amendments satisfy the Kenyans? Will the president actually note all the amendments that have to be done and clauses that have to be changed that will satisfy the Kenyans? So you can see that actually it might be employed to buy time, or the Parliament has to be recalled back. The challenge is that the Parliament has gone on recess, and the Parliament will have to be called back for a special convening. The anger then can be if the parliamentarians say, no, they cannot be called back or something like that. But remember, just a day or two ago, they were recalled back on an emergency convening to decide whether the army should be deployed. So if you can call them on an emergency meeting to decide on the army, whether they should go to the streets, you can definitely recall them to cater for this bill. So we are still in a very confused state in terms of which way forward will the president take or the Parliament. So that's where the Kenyans are. So him just saying that he withdraws the bill is not quite an answer.
And I mean, those are very key points. And just as a final question, and as we wrap up our conversation, if you can be as brief as possible, Doctor, just in as far as, what William Ruto was essentially elected for. I mean, many people thought he was going to be fighting against these rising living costs and the endemic corruption. So what we are seeing now is completely different from what we've seen in the past, where, most of these demonstrations were politically motivated, mobilized, by political figures, some based on ethnicity. But now what we are seeing is a broad community, particularly of young Kenyans, appealing broadly to those, fighting for those high living, costs and endemic corruption. So a lot of questions then and tough decisions that will be made by President Ruto.
Yes, and I think that's where the irony really is, because whatever President Ruto is doing now is actually what he campaigned against during his campaign. And looking at the Kenyan generally, and more broadly the Kenyan voting culture, we've been voting according to our tribes and according. So it has been such a politically charged nation in terms of how we vote and how we align according to our leaders and the government, and to just get the whole country, even in the strongholds and the tribal regions of the president, to actually join in the protest, can actually tell you generationally, I think our voting patterns are going to change very soon, just the same way I think it has affected South Africa, or in a different way, but same direction. And young people are no longer going to vote towards tribalism or tribal linkages, and they will actually break down what it is you're bringing to the table. And one of the videos that has actually been circulating social media, and we can see the strength of social media acting now in Kenya, is that President Ruto spoke exactly against the Uhuru government increasing taxes, pressing on the common man, which is the common citizen, the one who sells vegetables outside of her home and stuff like that. So he is actually doing exactly what he campaigned against. And I think the young people are very angry at being treated so blatantly disrespected as well. So I think that kind of like hypocrisy is what people are against. And just to say also, I think with the suffering that has come on a combination of COVID and the economic crisis, joblessness, and also seeing the president and some of the officials using extraordinary amount of money to pay themselves and to do trips and to do whatever. So the Kenyans are actually very angry that you're increasing our tax, but also some of our officials are earning much more than the U.S. president, and not to do an unfair comparison, but it's just to show that Kenyans officers are one of the most paid. And if you're in debt and if you're looking for money, that's the first place you should go to. So his reluctance to start from there is what is actually angering Kenyans, having unconstitutional offices as well.
No, absolutely. Dr. Liaga, let's leave it there. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we are pressed for time. Dr. Immaculate Asige Liaga, just putting a spotlight there in terms of what is happening in Kenya. Of course, we are seeing those protests continuing at the moment, but we will be monitoring those developments very closely.